Welcome to Creating Hyflex Courses webinar. I'm Mary Dixon. I teach communication at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and I've run faculty development programming for different colleges and universities for over a decade. Many of you may have never heard the term Hyflex, but the COVID-19 pandemic is making the term more popular. This webinar will give you more information that you can use as you plan your next course and decide whether or not to utilize this flexible instruction method. The goals for this webinar are to understand the concept of Hyflex and why we use it, learn how to apply it in course creation, and demo the Hyflex concept throughout this video. Hyflex was pioneered by Dr. Brian J. Beatty, Associate Professor of Instructional Technologies in the Department of Equity, Leadership Studies, and Instructional Technologies at San Francisco State University. Dr. Beatty has done significant research into how the course design can improve student course experiences. This is a multimodal form of instruction, and that's really the key to why people choose Hyflex. It allows you to deliver content face-to-face in a classroom, synchronously online with webcast, and asynchronously online through your LMS. So why do people choose Hyflex? Hyflex provides the maximum amount of flexibility to your students. It allows them to make a choice about how they will attend based on their current situation. If they're not feeling well, for example, they can watch live from home, but still interact with you and with the other students. If they have to work, they can do asynchronous coursework later. If they want FaceTime with classmates, they can come and attend to class as it's going on. This reduces attendance issues significantly. Students don't have a reason to miss class. Creating the course is done with the same focus on course design practices. Faculty start with learning outcomes at the center of their design, then choose the learning materials, lecture content, and learning activities that students complete both online and face-to-face. The course is going to follow basic principles for backward design, establishing outcomes, assessment measures, how students will learn. Once you have that, you can create your course. The key is to establish your priorities for what students need to learn, what's crucial, what's important, and what's worthwhile, and prioritize accordingly. Let's look at an example of course design with Hyflex built in. So this is my dog Scout. He's sweet, he's cute, but he needs some training. So let's look at how I might set up a Hyflex course for training dogs. At this point in my lecture, I could stop and add an activity for students to do after I introduce the topic. So in this slide, I've created a breakpoint, and you can see it at the bottom. The in-class and live students can take, say, 2 minutes to write down all of their ideas for training a dog, and I can discuss them when they have finished. For the online learners, they can pause the video and do a similar brainstorming activity that I've set up in my LMS. So what are my outcomes? In my potty training cat crate, I've got potty training, come and sit, sleep in a crate. So all of these are different outcomes that we can talk about based on what the students did in their activity. Now, once you have your outcomes, you can start to add the course materials that you're going to need for your Hyflex course. So when we talk about Hyflex, I think it's really important to think beyond the book. And that means that we want to think about things like articles on websites, videos, case studies are really excellent. What kind of websites students could look at, book chapters, tutorials. Essentially, we want to think beyond the book because you're integrating online content throughout the course. So you want to make it as interesting online as possible. So this is really about what do they need to learn before the lecture. In some cases, it really looks like a flipped class model in that sense, because you're providing engagement with content that's not you. Hopefully this content introduces the lecture and keys it up so the lecture is more successful. And this will allow faculty to focus on the toughest concepts or the most important points. So when they get to the lecture, they have a good foundation and you can really target the learning where you think you're going to be the most valuable player. Now, when choosing your materials, you want to be careful to pick the right amount and type of content. Careful not to allow information creep. That means that faculty tend to load too many things into a Hyflex course because you can just keep adding links and adding chapters. So really be conscious of time. This isn't about creating a lot more material. This is about targeting the material. Make sure whatever you choose that students know how and when to use it and when the relationship to the lecture ties it together. So too often students don't know what to do with the content the faculty assign. If you've assigned a textbook chapter, when do they need to use it? Do they need to have it open during the lecture? Do they need to make sure they've read it beforehand? In Hyflex, it is really important to know this information or the students get lost about what to do and when to do it. So whatever you assign, be sure the students have a checklist to follow so they know what is expected. Make sure it indicates whether things are required or optional. So if you're somebody who assigns a lot of optional things because you think they're interesting or cool or might help, make sure those are tagged in your Hyflex course so that some students don't end up getting lost and thinking they've done all the work that they need to, but maybe there was more to do. In a Hyflex class, I can stop here and ask questions to find a video that would help me learn to train my dog. Then I can show a few examples of those videos in class. I can ask my asynchronous students to do the same activity and list their links in a discussion board and have students comment on whether or not they found those videos helpful. So this is an example of where I can chunk my lecture and stop it, have activities for all three different modes that are very similar and get to the same learning outcome. Now it's time to create a Hyflex lecture. The process is pretty much the same as a face-to-face lecture, but you need to realize that your lecture will be viewed online as well as in class. So if you're somebody who walks around a lot, you want to think about that in terms of how that's going to look online. Also, when you're asking questions, remember students can't hear the audience, so you need to repeat the question back so that your online students aren't lost in the process. So your lesson structure should be broken up into chunks to allow for your breaks and allow those breaks to be natural. Remember, at the bottom is our learning outside of class. That's your foundation. Those are the course materials that we just added previously. Then you want to break up your lecture into 1, 2, or 3 topics. Remember, the more topics you add, the harder it will be for students to remember and the more breaks you're going to have to take. So 3 is the preferred number of topics to cover in any given lecture. Make sure you know how you're going to introduce and close your lecture so that it seems complete, particularly to somebody who's viewing it online. If you're sitting there chatting as your introduction with students in the room, that doesn't really enhance anything for online viewing. So consider having a cool intro. It could be a video, a picture, something that starts it, and then think about how you're going to close the lecture to make it seem complete. And again, I can stop my lecture and ask students to do a draft outline of 3 lecture topics for my dog training class and compare it with another classmate. My online students can do this as a reflection assignment or in a discussion board. So I've created a natural break in my lecture and I've got an activity that students can do no matter where they are and what mode they're using that applies the lesson that I've just taught in my lecture. Now, the final piece of this is to think about your course activities. What do students do? And I've given you some examples throughout this Hyflex piece. Once you know your learning level, you have to figure out what you want them to do. You can pick activities that demonstrate any type of learning. So here I've given you some examples of what your learning level is. So do they need to apply something, judge something, break down information, relate, know meaning, recognize and recall? For the lower levels, things like quizzes are great. As they get up to apply and analyze, case studies can be really helpful. When you want them to evaluate things, you can ask them to pull in samples like the training video activity that I suggested, where they evaluate each other's videos, and you can have them create their own stuff and apply it as well. Here are some examples for my dog training course. And understand, you might ask them to research the dog breed and identify characteristics. Apply, you might teach a dog to sit on command. Analyze, create a presentation comparing different techniques for training. And evaluate, have a dog training competition and review your peers. Now, to do that Hyflex style, we just add an online version. So understand, we still have our research breed and identify characteristics, but we can report out live or write a wiki. We can apply by teaching our dog to sit on command in class, but we could also do that on camera through a video recording. We can analyze by creating a presentation, but we can also develop it in groups, present live in class or recorded, and evaluate. Same thing. We could have a dog training competition that you can do in class, or you could record yourself doing that dog training. Now my course lesson plan looks like this. So you can see I've got my lecture topics at the top, I've got my intro and conclusion, I've got my activities in the middle, and I've got my learning outside of class. So I have a pretty complete lesson plan. So I could stop here and ask my Hyflex students to list 3 activities that could help someone learn to train a dog. And now we put it all together. And here's a sample of a lesson chart that takes us through 3 classes. Add your assessment at the end. That could be quizzes, tests, essays, projects, etc. And you have yourself a Hyflex course. So the goals for this webinar were to understand the concept of Hyflex and why we use it, learn how to apply it in a course creation, and for me to demo the Hyflex concept throughout the course. Hopefully you can consider adding a Hyflex option to your course to allow all types of students to make learning choices that fit their needs in a particular situation. I encourage you to look up Dr. Beatty's work on Hyflex, and I want to thank freepik.com for the images. If you need additional support, you can reach me at mary.dixon.com.